Tonight we're going to be talking about Solomon's observing God's dealings in life. Solomon observing God's dealings. Now, to give you a little bit of a refresher and to kind of catch Cheryl up on what we're talking about, we've been going through the book of Ecclesiastes. And, again, I stress that the book of Ecclesiastes, you need to take it as a whole. You can't take it just one thing. You've got, and really that's true with every book in the Bible. I mean, everything has a context, and you've got to take things in context. But with the book of Ecclesiastes, because the book of Ecclesiastes has a completely different perspective than many of the other books in the Bible, that's why you got to keep it into its context. So the thing that we've noticed with the book of Ecclesiastes is that it's talking about life under the sun. And you say, okay, what is life under the sun? Life under the sun is human life. It's life here and now. It is what happens from the time of our birth to the time of our death only. That's not to say that there isn't eternal life, because there is eternal life. But its focus, that is the book's focus, is on life here and now. And if we concentrate on life here and now, then there are certain conclusions that we can come up with. Really what we've been talking about, kind of to give you a little bit of a review, is that life under the sun is talking about man, and then that's it, okay? Mankind, and that's all that there is to it. It's not saying that God doesn't exist, because as we're going to be looking at tonight, He does, but it's the approach is that God is over here in this orbit, and man is over here in this orbit. Now, the way it should be is that God should be the center of who we are. That is, that our lives need to revolve around God. Okay? But life under the sun is that man is just over here doing his own thing, and God is over here. And what we're going to be looking at tonight is that God is going to be affecting life under the sun. But because we are not here revolving around God, we're kind of wondering what in the world is going on. Okay? Is that kind of, if I do that? Yeah, that's okay. I was thinking it's going to make somebody dizzy or something. Okay? All right.
Oh, now, come on.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Now, as we've been looking through the book of Ecclesiastes, you remember that Solomon came to some conclusions about things. And you remember that he kind of put life to the test. And he is saying, in this life under the sun, the time in between you're born and you die, what is going to be the gain of it? Okay? What are you going to be? What's going to be your advantage? What are you going to get from it? And because everything that gets taken away when you die, it's nothing. Okay? So it doesn't matter what you do in life. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how wise you are, how rich you are, how many friends you got. It doesn't matter. Everything comes to an end. And so because of that, one of the conclusions that he comes up with is life is meaningless. Okay? Oops. Meaningless. It is meaningless. Meaningless. If there's nothing to be gained of it, what's that?
It's freaking out again.
Yeah, but that's real pretty.
Colorful.
It's been doing it for 2 weeks.
I think I need to update something, but I told Gary 15 minutes ago that was not the best time to do it. So,
Not really.
We should pray for Satan to leave the...
I think we'll get through.
We'll survive.
Yeah, for thousands of years,
We made it
we
past
didn't even
surface.
have this, so we're okay. But one of the conclusions he comes up with is that life is meaningless. If there's not going to be any gain from life, then therefore what's it about? It's something that's empty, it's hollow, it's vain. Okay? And so another thing that he came up with is just simply this, and that is, you know what? You better just simply enjoy what you got while you got it. Right? So of all of these things that go on under the sun, the minute moments that you have that are enjoyable, that you have blessings from God, you might as well enjoy it while you've got it. Now something else, and that is in the process of enjoying what you've got, you always have to remember that everything that we do is going to come under judgment. And so, you need to make sure that we fear God and keep His commandments. That's going to be the conclusion at the end of the book. Okay? So those are the things that we've kind of talked about in the first 2 chapters. And that's really, at the end of chapter 2, that's pretty much the summation of the book. And so here we've got a book that's 12 chapters long, but we've covered all of his, philosophical discussion at this point. And so from this point forward, we're really not talking about, we are going to be talking about this. He's going to come back to this conclusion, he's going to come back to this conclusion, and he's going to come back to this conclusion occasionally. But he's not going to be really going into a lot of detail like he did before of how he's going to test his life and see if there's anything good about it. He's already done that. He's already come to the conclusion. And so instead, from this point forward, what we're going to be looking at is we're really going to be just simply talking about the dealings of life. If we're talking about life in between our birth and our death, then how are we going to do things in this life? And some of it's going to be kind of philosophical meanderings of what we're going to be looking at tonight, how God affects that. But a lot of what we're going to be talking about is just simply kind of wisdom and observation. And so, this is something that I really like about the book of Ecclesiastes, is just simply having an understanding about what life is all about. When we're at the job, when we're going through life, we're doing all these kinds of things, there's certain times that we're just like, how in the world can I figure this out? And, we wonder about all the different things. Some of the things in the book of Ecclesiastes is going to kind of shed a little bit of wisdom on it. And so, from here up until about chapter 12, we're really going to be kind of looking at those kind of things. Okay? All right. So, taking a look at chapter 3 and starting out in verse number 1. Okay? Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and in verse number 1. Here is something that I bet you have heard before. This is a popular thing. Okay, chapter 3, verse number 1. It says, "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down, a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." How many of you have heard this? How many of you have heard this at a funeral? Okay. I don't know why. I guess it's just kind of a poetic look on life, and that's maybe why people like to have it on a funeral. But I mean, it really doesn't have anything to do with the funeral, other than it comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, which is...
Well, the first 2.
Well, yeah, the first 2, but again, you got to look at it, everything else. It's not like this is in the Bible to be used at funerals. There's something else. So you look at this and you think, okay, what is going on here? And really, what is going on here is just simply that Solomon is, poetically speaking, giving a whole bunch of different contrasts. Okay, if you look at your sheet there, you notice these different contrasts. I mean, each and every one of them has a contrast to it. Oh, come on. There we go. Time to born. What's the contrast to it? Die. Plant. Contrast. Uproot. Kill. Heal. Tear down. Build. Weep. Laugh. Mourn. Scatter stones. Embrace. Say, not embrace. Search, give up, keep, tear, be silent.
Speak.
Where's that duct tape?
Right on cue.
You've been waiting for that one. Love, hate, war peace, okay? Now, what is this really talking about here is, is this saying that God is behind all of these things? What we have to look at is, if we look there at verse number 1, where it says that there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. That word time and season are synonyms for one another, but there's a little bit of a difference. And that is, time is talking about something that is a specific time, and then season is talking about a general time, a season. And so when you think about God's doing things in this life, there are some times that He will directly intervene with something. And there's times that He will just kind of work behind the scenes to bring things to His own ends and to His own conclusions. And the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus is an example of it. If you think about the resurrection of Jesus, that is something that God directly intervened in. The Spirit of God rose Jesus from the dead. So that was something that God was directing His intent into the affairs of man. But a lot of the other things involved with the death and burial of Jesus, God had His hand in it. God had His hand in it, but it was just kind of working behind the scenes. Okay? For example, the soldiers tearing the rope, or not tearing the rope of Jesus, but handing it for him. Who told them to do that? I mean, it was prophesied in the Old Testament that they would, but, they didn't know Old Testament prophecies. They were Roman soldiers. There's just, why didn't they do that? Well, they didn't do it because God put them in that kind of position, and God, way back in the Old Testament, when it was prophesied, knew that that was going to occur, and so He directed those affairs. Same way with Pilate. God put Pilate in power for that specific reason of handing Jesus over to be crucified to the Jews. And at the same time, He put Pilate in that position, and the antagonistic relationship with the Jews, to where Pilate, when Joseph of Arimathea came and asked for Jesus' body, he granted that. I think he kind of did that more as kind of a slight to the Jews, as well as kind of a respect, at least, of Jesus' person. And no, I'm not saying that he was saved by any means, but he realized that Jesus was somebody different than just who the Jews were saying. But see, all those different things is God working behind the scenes. So, there is this time and this season for everything that God does under heaven. Does that make sense? Okay. So if we look at this and we're thinking, okay, there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven, and we're looking at these things in terms of what we do, well, we got a little bit of a problem here, right? A time to kill, a time to hate, a time for war. Okay? Does that mean, and does that justify certain behaviors?
No.
Yes.
God isn't taken by surprise, and He knows what each one of us is going to do. He knows what the future is. I mean, one thing that God never says is, oops, or I didn't see that coming. He doesn't say that. So it's more than just Him directing. Yes, He directs everything, but He also knows. He knows our hearts. He knows our minds. He knows what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So He knows that there's going to be wars, when they're going to be, who's going to start them, who's going to be in them, who's going to do it. He knows all that.
And He does. And more to the point is that sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes He directs the affairs of that in order to get the result that He wants.
Yes. So I
Okay.
think it's a combination. He knows the future and he's directing it by knowing it.
Yes, and that's why we've got times and seasons, you know. And so there are certain times that God is going to directly involve himself in the affairs of mankind to bring about the result that he wants. There are some times that he's just going to be behind the scenes working, generally speaking, to do that. But all of these things really is just talking about what God does, okay? Really what we're talking about here is if you go over to the insights box, we're really talking about God's sovereignty. In this insights box right here, sovereignty versus free will. Who has control over the events in life? Well, God does. Okay? Anything he wants to occur will, and the things he wants prevented or stopped. This is the premise, or the premise is the basis of God's sovereignty, or his right of rule. And so, one thing that we need to understand is that because God is the creator of all things, then he has the right to do what he wants to do. Okay? And later on the last page, it's talking about how that works with judgment. Maybe we'll get over there, maybe we won't. But if you think about just simply God being creator, God has the right to do whatever he wants to do. And so sometimes he's going to do it, sometimes he's not going to do it. But in every kind of situation, he's going to make sure that the result is ultimately what he wants. And I stress ultimately is because when you look at this list, you know, each one of these contrasts, there is a downside to it. And the downside is not necessarily in the second part, right? So die, uproot, kill, tear down, weep, mourn, scatter, refrain, give up, throw away, tear.
Hey,
Well, I'm just trying to say, be silent or speak, which is, okay. But more hate. So you see, there's always the, you know, a negative connotation. And so when we're going through life and we're not understanding what God is doing, right? We're just saying, okay, there's a time for everything, a season for everything under heaven. But if again, this is all that we're looking at right here, you know, of that, then we're really perplexed with what's going on. Okay? Now, does that make sense?
yep.
Okay. All right, let's take a look at the questions on page number 14. Okay. Question number 1. How does God's sovereignty versus man's free will relate to salvation? I know we've talked about this a bunch in Ephesians, so you know, this is kind of a refresher for you. But how does God's sovereignty versus man's free will relate to salvation? I guess I didn't finish reading the insights box. God, however, does not make man robots. He gives us the power to choose for ourselves with the intent of making us responsible for our actions. How all of this plays out in everyday life is debatable, and the truth is found somewhere in between two extremes. Go too far one way, and man isn't responsible for his actions. You know, if we go way far, God is in charge of everything, then, well, you know, since God's in charge of everything, then we're not responsible for everything. But if you go too far the other way, where God doesn't do anything, then God is no closer to man than a cheering section. You know? Yay! Go man, do good. Okay? So, it's in between those two different points, right? Okay. So, with salvation, how does this work with salvation?
I think he prods every man's heart. Everybody knows that there's God. Everybody knows it. The Bible says that it's apparent just by looking around and observing nature. And Ecclesiastes says that eternity is in our heart.
We're going to get to that. You better be shoot.
I'm gonna get that duct tape.
Jump ahead.
Deep inside, we
Sharon, this is
know.
what we're talking about with
And
speaking.
God
Joyce jumps the
in our
gun.
heart. But then he leaves it to us to choose. If we love our sin and we love things like our sin or other things in the world more, we'll choose that instead of God. But he lets us choose.
Yeah.
I think he puts it in there. He puts it in our hearts, so we know the difference.
Mhm.
But then we can choose. We can choose our sins, or we can choose him.
Well, even more to the point, Jesus said in John chapter 6 that no one comes to the Son unless the Father draws them.
Yeah.
And so as far as salvation goes, it's not just simply that God is putting it to our hearts, is that the Holy Spirit is there convicting us and enlightening us. And without that conviction and that enlightenment, we can't even come to the Lord.
But then
So
he
does-
lets us choose.
Right. But at the same time, you go the other way and you say, okay, God is going to pick certain people to be saved and everybody else is lost. No, that's not at all. Because if that's the case, then,
What's the purpose of church?
well, no, not what's the purpose of church, but what's the purpose of repentance?
Oh, yeah,
What's the purpose of faith?
right.
That's something that we have to choose for ourselves, of whether or not we're going to repent of our sins, whether or not we're going to trust in Jesus Christ and ask for salvation. So you can see God's sovereignty and our free will really do work hand in hand together. It's God's sovereign purpose to send Jesus Christ to be the sacrifice for the world's sins. Jesus was as a lamb slain before the foundation of the earth. So back before everything began, God had it all mapped out. But at the same time, we have to come by faith and repentance. Okay? Now, does that make sense? Yes.
When you're talking about Jesus' crucifixion, even there, God used evil for his own purpose.
Yes.
Because not only was the most evil thing ever done, crucifying Jesus, but they wanted to crucify him other than on Passover holiday. They didn't want
Yes.
to do it. And God allowed them to be forced to do it because that's when he wanted it done. That would be when it was the most public display, and more people would know, more people would see, more people would hear about it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, he even used that.
It is really incredible when you look at all the different things about Jesus' crucifixion and how God worked
You know.
and that the Father worked in. I mean, it really is unbelievable. Hey, we need to have a Bible study on
Yep, yeah.
Yeah,
that.
no kidding.
Question number 2. For a person living God's will, how should his sovereignty make that person feel? And what about somebody outside of God's will? Sovereignty is God's right of rule.
I always feel like I'm being watched,
Okay,
and I really do believe that. That
okay.
God is always watching.
He is. He is.
Secure, yeah.
Yes, sir.
When we align our will with His will, we can feel a sense of security because we know that He's in control of all things.
Exactly.
And a sense of comfort.
In a sense of comfort. At the same time, if we're out of God's will, then what do we feel?
We tremble.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel distance. Like I feel like I'm not as close.
Well,
Like I feel like because I know like when I'm tempted, I'll feel like, if I try to ignore, the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit's convicting me. If I try to ignore it, then it eventually stops, and then I feel like God turned his back on me.
wait a minute.
Or he's mad or angry with me.
You
If,
mean if you go along with your temptation?
Right.
oh, okay.
If I go along with my
He's
temptation,
ignoring
Okay.
the
like if
temptation.
I don't try to forget about the temptation and I
Yeah.
just go
Okay.
along with it.
Well, we always need to remember that it's a promise in Scripture that He'll never leave us or forsake
Right.
us. So He's,
But he
that's
could be
not-
angry with us and
But
then,
he can be upset.
You're saying
as a
that's the
father would
distant
a child.
feeling.
yeah, that's the distant
For you,
feeling I
it
have.
feels distant.
So that's what I'm saying here is that if our lives are inside God's will, we do feel comfort and peace. But if it's
Right.
outside God's will,
Yeah,
then we do have that fear that's there of judgment.
that fear could be my distant feeling.
Yeah. It
Discomfort.
It could be, yeah. Now, one thing that we need to remember, I mean, kind of going back to page number 13, is that, this isn't to say that God's, at that bottom paragraph here, that these verses are not to say that God is behind evil. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon is observing all that goes on in life, both the good and the bad. We need to put this into the context of the rest of the Bible, that God allows evil but ultimately works it for his good in Romans 8:28. And so of all of these things, the bad things and the good things here, we need to remember that God is working everything for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. Okay? And so, but that is over a long period of time, isn't it? Okay. And so when we're in his will, what we're noticing is that, we're here, God's here, and that when God is doing something to us that is unpleasant or causing things to come into our life that's unpleasant, then we have the faith of knowing that he's working everything out for his good, right? And even if that's later on, after our life is over, or even later after he comes back again, that's okay because we have that faith. However, if this is all that there is to it, and God is allowing things to happen to us that are bad, then what are we thinking? Why is God doing bad stuff to us, right?
You start going through the people, 90% of them, there's expanded stories about them in the Bible. Joseph, think about the evil that happened to him. He was sold by his brothers into Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
He was wrongly accused of raping
Potiphar's wife.
Yeah, I mean, all the things, but it was all worked out for good in the end. And look at David.
Mm-hmm.
David had to put up with a butthole king for I don't know how long. It was trying to shish kebab him for a barbecue, and went through all kinds of things. But he ended up being king in the long run. Look at the prophets, and I mean, look at Jonah.
Look at Jesus.
Yeah, it just bad things happen in people's lives that God is using the bad a lot of times for the good that comes in later.
Yeah.
And if not then, it's going to be after we die because we're not living for this life anyway.
Right. But that is when we are not living life under the sun.
Right.
S-U-N. We're living life under the sun. S-O-N.
Right.
And there's the distinction. That's what I'm saying. You got to take the whole thing of the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes is great. It's wonderful. It's not depressing. It's not any of those things. But you've got to look at it, as a whole. All right? Okay. Continuing on down on page number 14. All right. Now we're going to start to get into the good stuff, the point of it. Really, if there's a key verse to this chapter, it's verse number 11. That's why I was just, All right. So, verse number 9. What does the worker gain from his toil? Oh, here we go again, right? This is the exact same thing that he is talking about with a little bit of different twist. Now he's talking about the worker. He's not talking about himself. And he's saying, okay, here's this guy that's out there laboring and slaving away. What does the worker gain from his toil? I have seen the burden that God has laid on men. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of man. Yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Well, notice that he's coming to the point in verse number 9. And he's really talking about this familiar question of what does the worker gain from his toil. And so he goes and follows that up in verse number 10 by saying that he's seen the heavy burden God has laid on men. Now what we're talking about here is, again, we've got, I don't need to keep on going up here making you car sick, but, of God over here doing things to man. We're over here in our own little orbit. And so, here's this heavy burden that God has laid on men. And he's going to kind of expand on this in verse number 11. In verse number 11, we see these three things here, okay? And these three things are, number one, God has made everything beautiful in His time. So if you think about God being in control of the times and seasons, right? And that there's always this season and this time for everything that's going on under heaven, is that God is going to make things beautiful, but notice it's in its time. It's in His time. It's when He wants it to be beautiful. And so it's not according to us, it's according to Him. And so if God is at the center of our universe, then we're okay with that. If God is not at the center of our universe, what is it?
Chaos.
It's chaos. It's a burden, isn't it? Okay? Because we want it to be beautiful, but it doesn't appear to be beautiful, even though we know it is. Okay? Second thing is, God has set eternity in the hearts of man. And Judy, you are absolutely right. I think that since we are created to be eternal beings, when God created Adam and Eve, He created them to live forever. Death didn't come about until after they sinned. Okay? And so since we're descended from Adam and Eve, we still have that, I won't say piece of eternity, but we still have that concept of eternity within our hearts. I mean, you just take a look at humanity, okay, as a whole. You take a look at people who are Christians and people who are different faiths today. You take a look at pagan religions down throughout the centuries. What do all of them have in common?
Eternity.
Life after death.
Egyptians, look at what they go through to make sure that their pharaohs will have food and
Yeah.
slaves and things in the afterlife.
Yeah. I mean, if you really stop and think about it, that is one of the people are saying, oh, well, how do we really know God exists? Well, how about that right there?
Yeah.
That all throughout time, people have a belief that number one, that there's a God, but number two, there is an eternity. There is something else after this life. And if you really stop and think about it, what would make us ever even think about that concept? I can see some philosopher coming up with that, when they think about it. But, broad scale over humanity, broad scale over the ages, no, it's there. Eternity is in the hearts of man. And what's else? And that is number 3. It is impossible for man to fathom what God has done. We can understand the first 2 points, right? But because we live in a finite world, we cannot understand everything. The complexity of how, when, and why all of this is going to take place is a burden to us. Okay? God's going to make everything beautiful in its time. Okay, when, God? How, God? Why, God? And sometimes when we ask those questions, isn't it almost a bigger burden than the problem itself?
Teaches patience.
It does. And patience is such a hard, horrible thing.
That's why I was about to say.
Lord, give me patience.
Yeah.
And give it to me right now.
Give it to me. All right. So we continue to take a look at verses 12 and 14. And we see that Solomon's going to go on to state a couple of things that he knows from this perplexity. Okay? So in verse number 12, he says this: I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy and to do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it. Nothing can be taken away from it. God does it so that men will revere Him. And so, if you think about just simply living life under the sun, if we're just simply looking about God making beautiful of everything in time, maybe it would be a very wise thing for us to stop wondering about all of these different times that the Lord has in the seasons. And to just simply say, hey, you know what, when we're going through something and we run into the good things, let's enjoy it as a gift of God. You know? And I know that some people say, no, Christianity isn't about enjoying good things, but, you know, yes it is. I mean, we're supposed to be thankful for God's blessings. How are we going to be thankful for God's blessings if we don't enjoy God's blessings? Right? And so as we're going through life, you know, there's times that we've got all these bad things around us, but we've got this one little bitty glimpse of good. Let's just stop and enjoy the good. Right?
I like the blessings that you point out on Sunday when, you know, you say that God gave us everybody gravity, hold us to the earth. God gave everybody sunshine so that they can have food. God bless everybody, and then a lot of people don't even believe in God, are blessed and don't even know it.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it. God is allowing us to live on this rock rent-free. Everything.
Yeah.
So, I thought you were going to say that you're talking about how I said we need to be thankful that it's 34 degrees and not instead of 32 degrees. That may be tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Okay. Questions at the bottom of page number 14. Have you ever tried to wrap your mind around eternity? How successful were you?
Takes me back to my childhood when you're like 7 and you're trying to like, am I here? Am I real?
Yeah.
You know how I don't know if y'all ever went through that when you were a kid. You know, those weird feelings of, wait, am I existing? Am I a person?
I still go
Is
through
this
this
a real
sometimes.
I don't know. I had weird thoughts, but eternity is like that for me.
The time is something that God made. He made it when He made the world. I mean, time didn't exist before then. So eternity is the absence of time. And it makes me grin because I think with the absence of time, there will be no alarm clocks.
But to be honest, like
Amen.
in our little finite world, thinking about forever seems exhausting.
It does.
So that's
I mean,
where I'm at.
I mean,
I'm sorry, I'm
You're
weak and
thinking
down
in
here.
relationship to time.
Judy,
You've
I'm
got
down
time
here,
in
you're
your-
up here.
you know.
I'm thinking how exhausting that sounds. I mean, honestly, to do it every single day.
You just gotta
There's no
take
day.
time completely out,
I
and
know.
then you have eternity.
I'm not there
Well, you
yet.
got to think about you're not going to have exhaustion anytime.
I know,
You
but
won't have any
when we're
physical
thinking in
pain.
our finite little world,
Right.
I understand what
Yeah.
she's saying because, you
we
know,
don't
I think,
know how to experience
I
that.
think, wow, we're going to be here 100 million years from now. And then I think, am I going to be bored at that point? And the answer is no. But at the same time,
But we don't understand that.
we don't understand.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
our human nature.
It's not in
Start
our
with the alarm
ability.
clock.
Work our way
Judy,
up.
you don't use an alarm
Yeah.
clock, admit it.
Yeah.
All right, verse number 14. Who wants to read verse number 14 again?
I will.
Okay.
I know that all God does will last forever. There is no adding to it or taking from it. God works so that people will be in awe of Him.
Okay. All right. Notice that last little phrase there. Okay. God does this so that people will revere Him. Okay. God does this so that people will revere Him. You wonder about why God does what He does in life and why God allows good things to happen to bad people and bad things to happen to good people. You know, you wonder why you think that you're doing something good and all of a sudden something bad. You wonder about all these things. You know, why does God do this? Well, one reason why He does it is He wants people to revere Him. Okay, so the question is this. Well, I think I already answered it. Why do you think that this ties into why God sometimes allows bad to happen?
It seems like that when bad things happen, it's when you reach out to God, you know. And people, like you said, who don't believe, usually when really bad things happen, they'll go to other Christians and ask them to pray for them because, you know, that's their way of reaching out sometimes.
Yeah, I remember something from God's Not Dead too, and how she said that, you know, sometimes the devil will allow people to live comfortably so that they won't reach out to God. They won't think they need help from anyone else.
Yeah.
And then it's basically like a jail cell of comfort. You know, you don't feel like you need any help, or you're self-sustaining and all that. And then once death comes, that jail cell slams shut. And, I mean, it's wide open, but you know, you don't feel like leaving because.
Yeah.
How would you know good times if you didn't have bad times? How would you know?
That's true, yeah.
How would you know having a good meal if you didn't have bad meals? I mean, if you had the same thing to eat every day and you never had anything that really tasted good, how would you know good meal? How would you know something that was really good? How would you know good if there wasn't bad?
And how would you know
Yeah.
God could solve a problem if you didn't have the problem to begin with?
And have him solve it, then that increases your faith. So, yeah. And trust, yeah.
Okay, last page. Okay. God's dealings and judgment. Maybe we'll get through this. If you look at verse number 15, which says, whatever is has already been, and whatever will be has been before. And God will call the past to account. So this verse is kind of a transitional verse, I think. Especially that last little part there about God calling the past into account. So God, in all of these sovereign actions that He does, He is going to hold us accountable. And if you think about it, and we're kind of running low on time, but this insight box right here talks about sovereignty and judgment, and that is that God, since He has the right of rule, then He has the right to make up His own rules. You think about the United States of America. The United States of America is a sovereign nation, and so therefore we can make our own rules. We don't have England making our rules for us because we are an independent sovereign nation. We make our own rules. But once you have your own rules made, then you also have the authority to enforce those rules. And so the same is true of God. He's sovereign, so He has the authority to say what He wants, what He doesn't, good and evil. And He also is going to go along and say, okay, since you have violated these rules, there's also going to be judgment involved. Okay? All right. So looking at verses 16 and 17, we see that it says this, and I saw something else under the sun. So this is all of His observations, right? And He says, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. Okay? And so here's two different places that wickedness should not be. It should not be in the place of judgment. It should not be in the place of justice. As far as life under the sun. We're not talking about life out of this world. We're not talking about final judgment, anything like that. We're talking about in the place where human courts are. Do we have justice?
Sometimes not in the place.
Do we have wickedness?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Do we have corruption?
Yes.
Yeah, we do. Why is that? Well, it's just simply because sin is present in every person, and so everywhere there's going to be a person, there is going to be sin present. Period. Okay? And you look and you say, wait a minute, it shouldn't be that way. But it is. This is an observation of life under the sun. You can like it, you may not like it, whatever. It doesn't matter. I mean, that's just the way it is. And so he says this in verse number 17, I thought in my heart, God will bring judgment both to the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity and a time for every deed. And so again, he's talking about, hey, all this time in seasons for everything under the sun. Okay, well, there's also going to be this time that God is going to take care of all of these things. If you think about how God is going to make everything beautiful in its time, then that means that He's got to remove the sin from the situation. And He can't remove the sin from the situation until He judges sin. Okay? All right. So in verse number 18, he goes on to start to think about something else as far as God's dealings with man. Verse number 18, he says, I also thought, as for men, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. Man's fate is like of the animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. Man has no advantage over the animal. Everything is meaningless. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Are we saying that there is no difference between us and Fido?
Life under the SUN, right?
Like when, and there is. I mean, you know, we have opposable thumbs. We have conscious thought. We have a lot of stuff going for us, right? Of course, Fido sleeping on the mat all day long. That makes us jealous, but
They're entrepreneurs.
huh?
They're entrepreneurs.
We're all sorts of things. And more than that, we are created in the likeness and the image of God. Okay, and that's what really separates us. But you know, here we've got. No.
Oh,
That's Susie.
Big tongue. Fido.
Susie.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So we got Fido. We've got Fido's owner. Okay. What happens to them both?
They die.
That's all there is to it. Okay. And if anybody's lost a pet recently, I'm not trying to be insensitive. Okay. But I just this is life under the sun. This is the cold hard facts of life, right? So that's what he's really getting at here, is that, you know, when you look at, you know, animals and you look at people, they are equal in terms of the faith, right? As far as life under the sun goes. There's no gain, there's no advantage, everything dies. Now you look at it in verse number 20, he says, all go to the same place, all come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the spirit of man rises upward and the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? Okay, I like the alternate translation in the NIV 4, where it says, who knows the spirit of man which rises upward, or the spirit of the animal which goes into the earth? Okay?
So is it like saying, who knows? And then stating it?
Well, okay, here's the difference. He's saying, who knows if one goes up, one goes down, okay? Or who knows the spirit that goes up and down, okay?
Right.
And as far as translating goes, I mean, you can go either way. But I think that the context is that this is better, okay? You know, of who knows the spirit. Because that's what we're talking about here. If you remember, he started out in verse number 18. As for men, God tests them so that they may see, okay? So God is doing the testing, and he knows where the spirit's going to go. Of whether the spirit, no, we're not talking about heaven. It's just simply, is, you know, the spirit of the animal going to go and that's it? Or is there going to be something else later on with man? God knows that. And whether you look at this translation of who knows if this happens, God knows. Or if you look at this translation, who knows the spirit that does these things? God knows. I mean, the answer is the same either way you go, is that God knows it, okay? And so, looking at questions. By the way, does everybody understand that? Everybody get that? We're running short on time here, so. Okay, questions. In your opinion, do people often consider their eternal destiny in light of judgment today?
is that just general society?
Just general society. Why not? I mean, do you think it would be a wise thing to do that?
Yes.
They're living for the now.
They're living for the now.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about that God allows things to happen so that men will fear Him. And I think that part of that is that people will just stop and think, hey, wait a minute, is there something else other than now? And, you know, as far as cushy comfort life, you know, in the United States of America, I mean, we're blessed with all kinds of things, but as far as, you know, just being hardened to the gospel, the United States of America is one of the hardest places on the earth to share the gospel with. I think part of it is because we're just so comfortable that people are not stopping and thinking about what happens later. What happens later. How does the concept of God's mercy mesh with His judgment? You know, we've been talking about God's judgment, but maybe we should talk about God's mercy before we leave off. How does God's mercy mesh with His judgment?
I think the fact that He doesn't just kill us right off the bat.
They even
I
offers.
mean, there's a lot of times when Hitler, why do you allow Hitler to go on so long? There's people that you wonder, why does He let him go on that long? And I think He's waiting for them to, either He's using them or He's waiting for them to come around to Him. It's the wheat and the tares, you know. You gotta wait until they both are completely grown, because if you pull them when they're young, how do you tell the wheat from the tare?
But we need to remember that even though God, there's judgment with God, there's also mercy with God too. And that God is just as much merciful as He is just. And so, you know, we have mercy through Jesus Christ. And so, you know, if we're reading all this and we're thinking, oh, we're talking about future judgment, we're talking about future judgment, we're talking about future judgment. Also remember that God so loved the earth, the world, that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth on Him will not perish but have everlasting life. And so there's that idea about mercy there because of God's love. Yes, God is going to judge, but that's why He sent Jesus to be our substitute, so that we can have mercy. All right, real quick, let's take a look at verse number 22. Okay? In verse number 22 it says this, so I saw that there is nothing better than a man than to enjoy his work, because that is his lot. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? So who can bring a man to see what's going to be beyond our life? Okay? So the question is this, if someone is able to see what comes after them, that is their fate, can that affect their happiness on earth?
Yes.
In what way?
You're anticipating something bad that's gonna happen to you. You know that thing's gonna happen to you. It can ruin your life up to that point that thing happens. I mean, you can, I don't want to know the future. There's bad things that are gonna happen that I wanna be fat and happy and ignorant right now. you
Okay,
know?
but what happens if you knew of something good?
Well, it might make me lazy about some of the things that I'm doing now too. You know, maybe I figure, well, that's gonna happen, so I don't have to work for it now, or, you know, it could really,
Change your goals in life.
yeah.
Well, how about this?
Uh,
What could be better than heaven?
Well, the fact that we're gonna live on the earth after heaven,
Okay, what can be better with eternal life with God?
not much.
Okay, nothing,
Yeah.
right?
So you're talking
So-
about knowing of eternity, not just the future all in life.
Well, I mean, that's part of it, but I mean, to, you know, kind of cut to the chase, if we know that we have everlasting life, then that gives us an opportunity to look beyond all of these things,
Yes.
right?
And
Okay,
that's what we should be looking to, even more than our future here on earth.
Right, and if we're not looking at that, then what are we looking at? We're just simply looking here, trying to wonder, what's gonna be in the future, and then, we're right back there in Solomon's
Yeah.
boat,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Okay. Questions? So all of that made sense? It is, I mean, it is
Break it
difficult,
down, yes.
but when you stop and you just look at it, it's like, wow, this is really profound. This is not, darkness, this is not gloom, this is not, poison mushrooms and, stuff like that. This is something of, wow, this is wisdom for us. Okay. All right, so we'll go on and take a look at the next lesson, chapter 4, next week. Actually, next week we're going to go into chapter 4 and chapter 5. We've got a lot of ground to cover next week. So, look at your books, read it, try to answer the questions, look at the Bible, and read it, and don't just simply skim over it, but, read it and try to think about it. Because Solomon's a smart guy. You gotta really use your noggin to keep up with it. Okay? All right. Okay. Let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Dear Lord in heaven, thank you for everything you've given us. Thank you for your blessings. Thank you for your word and its guidance. Lord, help us to look beyond this life to the next life. And Lord, help us to understand that you love us, that you've taken care of all these things. And Lord, for those who haven't repented of their sins, I ask that you would enlighten them, help them to do that. And for us who have accepted you as our Savior, I ask that you would be with us and help us to make you the center of our lives and have our lives revolve around you. Lord, please forgive us of our sins and be with us as we go through this week. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Sharon, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you, Matt.